Who has more political moral clarity, Donald Trump or the Pope? Just imagining myself asking this question 10 years ago or 15 years ago. I'd be like, what? On what? How did that question arise? Well, I have to tell you that when it comes to political moral clarity, Donald Trump takes the win. Now, people are struggling to come to terms with this. Michael Knowles kind of ties himself in knots trying to explain what's going on with the Pope. I say this, I don't know what the right word is, humbly and just with genuine sincerity. But from a Jewish standpoint, we have plenty of Christians and Catholics that love Israel, support this channel, and that's wonderful, and you're fully welcome here with an open heart and open embrace, as is even the Pope himself if he ever chooses to tune into YouTube. But the Catholic Church as an institution has been a source of, I'm afraid to say, fear, terror, or apathy at the very least for the Jewish people throughout the last centuries, 1,000 years basically, because the church has either supported or turned a blind eye or really encouraged the deicide accusation that the Jews are responsible for killing Jesus, and their blood, Jesus' blood is upon the Jews for eternity, and whether it's blood libels, inquisitions, pogroms, ghettos, the Crusades, and even silence during the Holocaust. And I learned recently the Pope did not support the hanging of the Nazis at Nuremberg, saying that this will just radicalize more Germans to become Nazis. Doesn't that sound familiar? It's just like what they're telling us about not going to war with Iran. So it's not news to Jewish people that the papacy, the institution of the Pope, lacks moral clarity, divine clarity. That is something that unfortunately we are all too familiar with. And it took 1965? I think that was the year of the Nostra Aetate, the announcement that the Catholic Church no longer holds the Jewish people collectively responsible for the murder of Jesus. Well, thank you very much. 2,000 years too late. And frankly, if it's taken you 2,000 years to announce that, in my humble opinion, you've lost the right to be giving us all moral lectures. And we'll have a look at what Michael Knowles had to say in a moment. But let's just first have a look at what the Pope had to tell us all about, to lecture, really, the Western world about immigration, particularly coming from Muslim countries.
I know that in Europe there are many times fears that are present but oftentimes generated by people who are against immigration and trying to keep out people who may be from another country, another religion, another race. And in that sense, I would say that we all need to work together. One of the values of this trip is precisely to raise the world's attention to the possibility that dialogue and friendship between Muslims and Christians is possible. I think one of the great lessons that Lebanon can teach to the world is precisely showing a land where Islam, Christianity are both present and are respected, and that there is a possibility to live together, to be friends. Stories, testimony, witnesses that we heard even in the past 2 days of people helping each other, Christians with Muslims, both of whom had their villages destroyed, for example, of saying we can come together and work together. I think those are lessons that would be important also to be heard in Europe or North America.
This is so classic, by the way, of like the interfaith approach to things. They just say, "Oh, isn't everything wonderful and lovely? Let's have chats, and we all just want to live together in peace." And really, there's no problems at all. Everything's completely fine. No one's saying that we don't want to ultimately have peace and dialogue and respect between all different communities. The question is how you get there. By choosing to bury your head in the sand and instead say what looks good and sounds nice over actually what is necessary. The same issue happened with Iran. You say we need to come to the negotiating table. It's precisely what the Catholic Church would have said, about making peace agreement with the Nazis. Well, let's all come to the negotiating table. No. When you're dealing with evil, you have to confront it. That's how you get peace. And ignoring the fact that we're not talking about Muslims as individuals, but Islamic culture, according to polling and data from opinions that exist within even British Muslim communities, according to the Henry Jackson Society poll recently, found widespread support for Hamas and for extremist positions, for Sharia law, and just ignoring the cultural problems that exist by having mass immigration from Muslim countries into Europe is just said in the name of dialogue and peace, and actually this is flawed morality. Torah morality teaches, no, you don't turn a blind eye or turn the other cheek when people are trying to, or ideologies are trying to infiltrate your culture and destroy you. If someone rises to kill you, you rise up and kill them first, in the case of Iran. In the case of the whole, we should have open borders. Well, the other line from the Talmud is, if you are kind to the cruel, you will end up being cruel to the kind. And Donald Trump attacked the Pope for this, and rightly. It's remarkable to see this. That we're seeing a big figure of the Western world now, standing up to this kind of misdirection of a religious leader that has, I think, sadly, infected the Western moral mindset. This is not morality. It's not biblical morality, even. Someone here was saying you've got a man talking about open borders while sitting in a walled-in sanctuary, telling everybody to give more money while he's decked out in fine linen and gold. By the way, you should know that this problem does not exist solely in the Catholic Church at all today. We see the, woke religion, where there's really no difference between what he would be saying and a UN official would be saying. There's really, no difference between the two. And we see this happen throughout, this total lack of moral clarity. And I think it's quite remarkable that we're seeing someone like President Trump showing this kind of moral clarity in the face of all of this. And it's quite a big moment, actually. I've said this before. I do believe that President Trump is an usherer from a messianic perspective, from a Jewish perspective. He represents the good of what Esav, who was really the forefather of the Western world, what he can be. What he can represent, which is really pushing more towards true, genuine Torah morality. Meanwhile, the Pope went to Algeria, giving a kind of fawning presence there in their great mosque, forging the Vatican-Islam super alliance that Pope Francis started. Here they are together. And by the way, I have no problem with dialogue and talks and trying to make things better. But the problem is if you're actually going to ignore issues that are happening, then you are turning a blind eye to the problems. Pastor Dumisani Washington, who we've had on the show a bunch of times, said the more Islam slaughters Christians, the more the Roman Catholic Church embrace Islam. This is to say nothing of both religions slaughtering Jews for millennia. These are the footsteps of the Messiah. Indeed. What's going to happen is throughout, as we get closer and closer to the Messianic era, everything's going to come to light. As the light is being shone on things, we're realizing that the flawed ideologies, the flawed religious doctrines, institutions, and the lies they've been pushing, the immorality they've been pushing, it's all going to come to light. It's all going to come to the surface. Really remarkable. Ayan Hirsi Ali put out a article in the Daily Mail where she argued that Pope Leo is conspiring with Democrats to harm America. America will suffer the consequences. On April 9th, Pope Leo met with David Axelrod, one of the most seasoned operators in the Democratic Party and the architect of Barack Obama's rise to power. 4 days later, Leo delivered the first in a series of pointed public critiques of President Donald Trump and his Republican administration. Hal Lambert, the founder of Point Bridge Capital and one of the more clear-eyed observers at the intersection between American politics and institutional power, saw coordination where others saw coincidence. This is 100% political, okay? This is all about trying to hurt President Trump's Catholic vote during the midterms and Republicans in the midterms. Now, speaking of Catholics who are struggling to deal with all of this, have a watch of Michael Knowles being asked about, this whole feud between the Pope and Trump because he himself is a Catholic.
Obviously, the Holy Father differs in opinion with the president on a handful of matters. It is worth pointing out, though, as the Holy Father's critics want to make him out to be some liberal communist or whatever. The Pope is more conservative than any American politician by a country mile. It's not close. I understand he has a more moderate or open view of immigration. I understand he does oppose certain military actions, but that kind of cuts both ways in the GOP. But unlike every single issue, the Roman pontiff, I assure you, is to the right of a regular Republican politician. So all of that to say, I think there's substantial overlap. And when it comes to the president's reaction, I suspect he was reacting against the most liberal bishops in the United States going on 60 Minutes. And so I don't even really think that he was reacting against the Pope. And I don't think that those handful of very, very left-wing bishops really accurately represent the Pope's views.
I'll tell you why this is a flawed argument. You can find ISIS leaders and Iran's leaders who are very, very conservative. Would Michael Knowles therefore be saying, hey, let's not denounce these people too quickly as deeply morally flawed in their approach? Because they're very socially conservative. You can even find, by the way, some leftists, Nicolas Maduro, socialist, communist, who also was very socially conservative. So what? We're talking about, as a leader, providing moral, political clarity, not just on social issues, but on the most pressing issues of the day, surrounding geopolitics, surrounding war, dealing with existential threats and enemies. And also existential threats in terms of the level of mass migration you're going to be having into a country that could potentially totally change its social fabric. And there, the Pope does not provide that kind of moral clarity. And I'm sure it's very painful for Michael Knowles, who's a practicing Catholic, to see this. He's trying to kind of make sense of it all and explain it. I wish he could just be a bit more intellectually honest with us. And in saying that, the Pope has got this wrong, but maybe it's very difficult for him to say that. Let's have a look at what Dana Lash had to say in conversation with Nick Freitas.
When the Pope comes out and says things like, we need to be less fearful of Islam, or he says that Lebanon is a perfect example of Christians and Muslims living together in harmony and brotherhood, I'm looking around going, I'm sorry, but when you look at Christian persecution around the world, you notice a pattern. Yeah. Christians are most persecuted, and where they are persecuted by Islamists. And so, again, with all due respect, it is easy to talk about getting along with Islam when you have the Swiss guards. Yeah. The Nigerian Christians being butchered by Muslims right now don't have the Swiss guards. And while I can appreciate the Pope wanting to foster peace, I think we need to understand that it takes two sides to foster peace. When the Pope...
the one of the big problems here is that we have total category errors. Talking about, well, if we come back to the negotiating table, then we have peace. No, you don't have peace. You have peace when the threat is eliminated. When we're looking for peace, we want peace of mind. Not have to worry about these existential threats the whole time, because you can be at peace, but constantly trying to deal with the threats from a diplomatic standpoint, from a security standpoint, intelligence standpoint, and it drains so much of your national resources. Peace means the threat is gone. So we're making a category error when we say, well, let's have peace, let's go back to the negotiating table. No, you get peace, you save lives when the threat is gone. This is one of the most important things to understand when understanding the current situation we're in, because so many people try to say, hey, it's an escalation, what Trump is doing. It's going to lead to more bloodshed. War is terrible. Yes, war is terrible. And sometimes it's terribly necessary. And actually, you end up causing more bloodshed, more harm, by not dealing with the threat. Think how many lives could have been saved had we gone to war and finished off this Iranian regime before they slaughtered, 45,000 of their own civilians? There's a serious responsibility that hadn't been taken as a result of waiting, and a real moral accounting that will need to take place there at some point when this is all over. By the way, if you haven't already, please do hit the subscribe button below this video, like this video, comment and hype. All these things really, really help us to grow. Just quickly, we've all heard of heaven, hell, and the afterlife and at some point I'm sure you've given it some thought. But the Jewish view is radically different from almost everything you've been taught, and once you hear it, it will change how you understand life itself. Have a watch of the trailer for our new JTV Plus documentary called Heaven, Hell and the Afterlife, and you can watch the full film right now by clicking the link below in the video description. Across the world, the afterlife is described in simple terms: heaven above, hell below, the devil waiting to tempt you, and a humanity born in original sin. But Judaism tells a story that is older, deeper, and far more hopeful, less obsessed with fear and more rooted in purpose. A story where the soul is not born guilty, but born noble, where the body is not the enemy, but the partner, where the devil isn't God's rival, but his assistant, because Judaism has no second power, where hell exists, but not forever, where heaven exists, but not as the final destination, and where the real end of the human story is resurrection, not escape. Judaism views history as a mission, not a mistake. Other civilizations teach that we are here to earn our way into heaven. Judaism teaches that we are here to bring heaven down to earth. And to understand what happens after we die, we first have to understand why we're here in the first place. In this JTV Plus documentary, we're going to reveal the Jewish vision of life after death. One of the most misunderstood ideas, but if understood correctly, can transform your very understanding of life itself. To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description.